The Israeli-Palestinian conflict is one of the most protracted and complex conflicts in the world. It is a conflict rooted in competing claims to a small but strategically significant piece of land. This land holds deep religious and historical significance for both Israelis and Palestinians. For Jews, it is the ancient land of Israel, the birthplace of their religion and the site of their holiest shrines. For Palestinians, it is their ancestral homeland, where they have lived for generations. The region sits at the crossroads of three continents: Asia, Africa, and Europe. This geographical location has made it a cultural and religious melting pot. However, it has also made it a prize sought by empires and conquerors throughout history. Control of the region has shifted hands numerous times, leaving behind a legacy of conflict and instability. The Balfour Declaration of 1917, in which the British government expressed support for the establishment of a national home for the Jewish people in Palestine, further inflamed tensions. This declaration, while ambiguous in its wording, was seen by the Zionist movement as a promise of statehood. However, it failed to address the concerns and aspirations of the Palestinian Arabs who made up the majority of the population. Following World War I, the British were granted a mandate over Palestine by the League of Nations. Their task was to administer the territory and prepare it for eventual independence. However, the British faced the daunting task of balancing the competing demands of the Jewish and Arab populations. Jewish immigration to Palestine increased during this period, leading to growing tensions and outbreaks of violence between Jewish settlers and Palestinian Arabs. The 1947 UN Partition Plan, which proposed dividing Palestine into two states, one Jewish and one Arab, was rejected by the Arab leadership. They argued that it was unfair to give more than half of Palestine to a minority population. The plan was never implemented, and in 1948, Israel declared independence. This declaration triggered the 1948 Arab-Israeli War, which resulted in Israel gaining control of more territory than originally allocated by the UN plan. The war also led to the displacement of hundreds of thousands of Palestinians who fled or were expelled from their homes. This displacement, known as the Nakba, or catastrophe in Arabic, remains a deeply traumatic event in Palestinian history and a major obstacle to peace. The war ended in 1949 with the signing of armistice agreements, but it did not resolve the underlying issues of the conflict. In recent years, tensions have been further exacerbated by a number of factors. These include the expansion of Israeli settlements in the West Bank, the ongoing blockade of the Gaza Strip, and the failure of peace negotiations. The expansion of Israeli settlements into the West Bank, considered illegal under international law, has been a major point of contention. Settlements are seen by Palestinians as encroaching on land that they claim for a future state. The blockade of the Gaza Strip imposed by Israel and Egypt after Hamas took control of the territory in 2007 has had a devastating impact on the civilian population. The blockade has severely restricted the movement of people and goods, crippled the economy, and led to a dire humanitarian situation. The failure of numerous rounds of peace negotiations has fueled a sense of hopelessness and frustration on both sides. The lack of progress towards a two-state solution, once seen as the most viable path to peace, has led some to question its feasibility. The recent escalation of violence was sparked by events in East Jerusalem, a part of the city claimed by both Israelis and Palestinians. The threatened eviction of Palestinian families from their homes in the Sheikh Jarrah neighborhood, combined with clashes between Israeli police and Palestinian protesters at the Al-Aqsa Mosque, one of Islam's holiest sites, ignited widespread anger and protests. Hamas, the militant group that controls Gaza, responded to the unrest in Jerusalem by firing rockets into Israel. Israel retaliated with airstrikes on Gaza, targeting what it said were Hamas military sites. The exchange of fire quickly escalated into a full-blown conflict, with both sides engaging in intense fighting. Section 4. The human cost of a perpetual conflict. The conflict has had a devastating impact on the lives of both Israelis and Palestinians. Thousands of people have been killed in the violence, including a disproportionate number of Palestinian civilians. The constant threat of violence has created a climate of fear and insecurity. In Israel, rocket attacks from Gaza have forced people to live in bomb shelters and disrupted daily life. The conflict has also led to a rise in racism and intolerance within Israeli society. In Gaza, Israeli airstrikes have destroyed homes, schools, and hospitals, leaving thousands of people homeless and without access to basic necessities. The blockade has already pushed the impoverished enclave to the brink of humanitarian disaster. The psychological toll of the conflict is immeasurable. Generations of Israelis and Palestinians have grown up in the shadow of violence, witnessing firsthand its traumatic effects. The constant cycle of violence has left deep scars on both societies, fueling anger, resentment, and mistrust. The conflict has also had a devastating impact on the Palestinian economy. The West Bank and Gaza Strip suffer from high rates of unemployment and poverty. The restrictions on movement and trade imposed by Israel have stifled economic growth and development. The conflict has also hampered efforts to improve the living conditions of Palestinians. Section 5. A world divided: international perspectives on the conflict. The international community has long been divided on the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. Some countries, particularly in the West, are seen as more sympathetic to Israel, citing its right to self-defense and security concerns. Others, particularly in the Arab and Muslim world, are more sympathetic to the Palestinians, viewing them as victims of Israeli aggression and occupation. International law considers the West Bank, including East Jerusalem, to be occupied territory, and Israeli settlements there as illegal. However, the United States, Israel's closest ally, has historically been reluctant to use its political leverage to pressure Israel into making concessions. The role of Hamas, designated as a terrorist organization by many countries, further complicates the situation. While Hamas's rocket attacks on Israeli civilians are condemned, there are also concerns about the proportionality of Israel's military response and the impact on Palestinian civilians. The International Criminal Court's decision to investigate possible war crimes committed by both sides has been welcomed by human rights groups, but condemned by Israel. The conflict has become increasingly polarized, with social media amplifying narratives of grievance and victimhood on both sides. This polarization makes it even more challenging to find common ground and achieve a peaceful resolution. The lack of a unified international response and the absence of a credible peace process have allowed the conflict to fester.